Well, good morning or good afternoon for everyone joining us across the globe. And Cindy, thank you for that introduction. Um, so, welcome to Preventing DNS Infrastructure Tampering. It's another webinar in our incident response series providing cybersecurity awareness and best practices. We're definitely excited for you to be here today to present this introduction to understanding and preventing domain name system attacks. But before we get into the content, I like to cover some logistical terms, items, and then we'll get started. My name is Adrian. Go ahead and introduce today's instructors. So my name is Adrian, and I'm a cybersecurity consultant for Motorola Solutions with more than 16 years of experience in the cybersecurity realm. For the last 14 years, I've supported the DoD community and the United States government's efforts in cyber defense, as well as supporting various DHS training and awareness programs over the past 8 years. Along with that, I'm a retired Air Force member, spending the last few years working as a cyber protection team member. And then joining me today will be Kobe. And Kobe is an information security professional with over 20 years of experience in both the government and private sector. His professional activities have included incident handling, forensics, red and blue teaming exercises, penetration testing, vulnerability and risk assessments, and creating and managing information security programs. All right, let's talk about today's agenda. Over the course of this hour, we will introduce DNS, or what's referred to as domain name system, the common vulnerabilities exploited through DNS tampering, and the impact that these attacks can have on organizations. We will use the Identify, Mitigate, and Recover framework to cover how to identify attacks, best practices to prevent and mitigate damage, and how to respond and recover in the event of an attack. After that, in the second half of the course, we will explore real-world examples of DNS attacks, their impact, and how the organizations responded to these intrusions. We will also be asking some knowledge check questions throughout the presentation, and we'll finish up with some resources that are available to you as a reference. And from now, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Kobe, to get us started.
Great, thanks, Adrian. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. Let's start by looking at our lesson objectives for the day. And it's essential for organizations and agencies to establish robust security protocols in order for them to be able to proactively protect against DNS attacks, which can be pretty devastating, as we'll see later on. By detecting these threats before they happen, the organizations can prevent those kinds of attacks and protect their reputations and finances from damage caused by these attacks. So in this webinar, we'll be covering the basic concepts of these attacks, including the common vulnerabilities associated and ways to mitigate these vulnerabilities, and also attack response and recovery, what needs to be done if you do fall victim to one of these attacks. You'll also learn some best practices on how to protect your organization's sensitive data, assets, resources, and systems. So raise your hand if anyone has been a victim of or has had to deal with a DNS incident in the past. And several of you. That's good. So this should be good for you, and you can relate to how damaging these attacks can be. So since 2018, DNS attacks have grown rapidly in frequency and cost. It's always been a problem since the beginning of the internet, but it is becoming more and more of a target since it can cover a lot more area and do a lot more damage than targeting individual systems or organizations. The market intelligence firm known as IDC, which is International Data Corp, published in 2019 Global DNS Threat Report, finding that DNS attacks cost an average of just over $1 million for organizations. And that's an increase of about 49% from 2018. And while organizations have faced a 34% increase in DNS attacks since 2018, more than 85% of top retail brands found domains selling counterfeit versions of their products, and 63% of organizations suffered application downtime, which does hit the bottom line as well. The report also found that 45% of organizations that were surveyed had their websites compromised, and 27% experienced business downtime. 1 in 5 businesses lost over $1 million per attack, and 63% of attacked organizations experienced application downtime. In a related report, the Domain Fraud Threats Report, which was from Proofpoint, a security service and appliance provider, found that of the millions of the fraudulent domains registered, 1 in 4 have security certificates, and more than 90% remain active on a live server. And according to this researcher from Proofpoint, the fraudulent domains hide in plain sight by using many of the top-level domains, registrars and web servers as legitimate domains. For example, 52% of all new domain registrations in 2018 used the .com top-level domain. This TLD was similarly popular with fraudsters and always has been since it was the original top-level domain. Nearly 40% of new fraudulent domain registrations use .com. So what is DNS? Can I get a raise of hands for anybody who is not familiar with the functioning of DNS? All right, good. We have a few, so this will be important information. It's like the phone book of the internet, or a directory service of the internet. People access information online through domain names like nytimes.com, espn.com, or nasa.gov. And if they didn't have that directory service, then they would actually have to enter individual IP addresses and remember those IP addresses, which is quite literally not possible. And web browsers communicate through IP addresses, and DNS translates these names to IP addresses, which in turn allows browsers to load the internet resources requested by the user. And each device connected to the internet has a unique IP address, which other machines use to find the device. DNS servers eliminate the need for people to memorize all these different IP addresses, which, like I said, is quite impossible.
All right, well,
So,
thank you, Kobe.
Adrian, yeah, could you give us some examples of DNS attacks?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm thankful for that information, providing some background in regards to DNS. I think the phone book is a great example. You can kind of think of it as, on your phone. How many people can remember everyone's exact phone number of all the people in their contact list? You can remember the name probably a lot easier than you can remember the actual 7-digit numbers that you need to dial. And so I think that phone book example is a good example of why DNS is important for the internet. All right, so as Kobe mentioned, now I'm going to talk about some of the examples of DNS attacks that have been more prevalent throughout the last few years. The first one is DNS infrastructure tampering, and it involves techniques that allow an attacker to access to an organization's DNS. Generally, they compromise a user's credentials and use them to make changes to DNS records. And then once the records are changed and altered, the attacker can access and intercept many things like your web address, your mail traffic, and then web traffic as well. An attacker can take that information and redirect incoming traffic to an unsafe website that may contain viruses or may collect information about your customers or your business. Next, we have DNS poisoning, which occurs when an attacker inserts domain name associations to a malicious IP address. This is referred to as DNS poisoning. And the DNS cache maintains an incorrect association for future DNS server queries from end user browsers. And then lastly, we have DNS espionage campaigns, which use malware to infect victims' computers and establish HTTP and DNS communication with the attacker's domain. Now, in one example, attackers lured victims to malicious websites with job postings, leading victims to download Microsoft Office documents with embedded macros. And the macros were actually malware that enabled attackers to use a classic on-path attack, or what's formerly known as a man-in-the-middle approach, to collect SSL encryption certificates for targeted domains. These stolen certificates also allow them to then decrypt all intercepted web traffic, including VPN-protected traffic. So those are just some of the examples, as I mentioned, to kind of take note of. All right. From a threat perspective, in late 2018, cybersecurity organizations across the globe started to detect an increase in malicious activity targeting DNS infrastructure. Using common tactics, attackers can direct user traffic to their own infrastructure for manipulation or inspection before passing it on to the legitimate services. This creates a risk that persists beyond the period of traffic redirection. Frequently, different domain and DNS records are owned and managed by different parts of an organization, and the decentralization of the DNS ecosystem and organizational governance processes make it more difficult to monitor and secure domains. Now let's take a brief look at the history of DNS security and vulnerabilities. In 1993, Christoph Scuba released a paper entitled Addressing Weaknesses in a Domain Name System Protocol, which outlines exploits targeting several vulnerabilities, including the technique of DNS cache poisoning. From there, next on the timeline, in 1997, the first edition of DNSSEC, or DNS Security Extension, was released to reduce vulnerabilities discovered with DNS. Continue on down the timeline, in 2005, the next edition of DNSSEC was released and helped to provide a more secure DNS infrastructure by supplementing cryptographic signatures to existing DNS records. And then in July of 2008, the CERT Coordination Center announced that Dan Kaminsky had discovered a fundamental flaw in the DNS protocol. The flaw could allow attackers to easily perform cache poisoning attacks on most servers by targeting the DNS time to live, or TTL, defense. In 2010, we saw DNS Changer, a piece of malware that ran on a victim's machine and changed their DNS server via Windows API calls. In 2014, we saw an evolution of this principle in the form of Soho, a piece of malware that spread itself via cross-site request forgery. Essentially, it sent many requests trying default passwords for many brands of routers in an attempt to find the victim's router and change its DNS server. And then lastly, here we have in 2020, researchers discovered a vulnerability dubbed NXNS, or non-existent name server attack, which disrupts the authoritative servers of the domain by overloading them with invalid requests. This effectively blocked access to all services provided under the domain during the attack.
So how does DNS tampering work? We'll explain that first because that is one of the most common attacks. First, the attacker begins by compromising or using obtained user credentials of an account that has the ability to make changes to that organization's DNS records. Then the attacker can alter the DNS records and replace the legitimate address of a service with an address of the attacker controls. This lets them direct user traffic to their own infrastructure or wherever they want before passing it on to the legitimate service. This creates a risk that does persist beyond the period of attack redirection. Then because the attacker can set record values, DNS record values, which we don't have time to go into the details of. They can also obtain valid encryption certificates for an organization's domain names. What this does, it allows the redirected traffic to be decrypted in a legitimately seeming way that exposes any user-submitted data. And since the certificate is valid for the domain, the end users receive no warnings. So sometimes you go to a website that doesn't have a valid certificate, you see that pop up, that warning. That won't show up in this case. So who's susceptible to this? Don't forget, while it's important to secure your organization and all of its websites or domains, any end user, any user accessing the internet can become a victim of a DNS attack. So they can be compromised by trying to access your infrastructure or services. It should be noted that general cyber hygiene above and beyond DNS-specific security measures can go a really long way into helping prevent these attacks. So always be careful and keep your systems up to date. So who can tell me in the chat what kind of examples might indicate a DNS attack? Yes, long redirects. Detected but not blocked. Slow browsing. Yes, all these are the most common indicators. And inaccessible sites. Yes. Great. Great answers. Private signed keys. That's a good one. If you know how to examine the keys. Great. Great answers, everyone. Thank you. So referring back to identification of indicators of a DNS attack, which many of you have already answered all of these, or came up with all of these answers. So websites begin much slower than they should be. The response is very slow. That could be a slow redirection. You could discover that the information that's returned to you is not correct. There may be some things that are just not right compared against independent information sources, and irrelevant and unwelcome pop-up ads are always a key indicator as well. So I'm going to let Adrian address DNS tampering mitigation.
Thank you, Kobe. So in regards to DNS tampering mitigation, CISA provides guidance to help organizations mitigate their vulnerabilities to DNS tampering. The focus of these recommendations is on an external, public, internet-facing domain and DNS records. They're not concerned with internal infrastructure. But to capture the scope of these recommendations, CISA uses the term DNS ecosystem to include things like root zones, top-level domain registries, domain registrars, domain registrants, and authoritative DNS servers. Various organizational units may be responsible for managing these services, and successful outcomes depend on their close coordination. Now, the first step is to review your organization's DNS records. For all organization-owned or managed domains, you need to review all public domain records with domain registrars to verify the associated name server records are delegated to their intended DNS servers. You should review all DNS records on an all authoritative and secondary DNS servers to verify they resolve to the intended destination. And any discovered discrepancies should be investigated immediately and treated as a potential security incident. Next, you should change DNS account passwords. If discrepancies are discovered, immediately update passwords for all accounts on systems and software that can make changes to the organization's DNS records. Should maintain password hygiene, such as creating strong passwords and periodically changing passwords. Now, along with when we're talking about passwords, you should add multi-factor authentication, or MFA, to DNS accounts. You want to implement and enforce MFA for all accounts on systems that can make changes to your organization's DNS records. If MFA is not supported for records hosted by third-party providers, CISA strongly encourages organizations to consider migrating to providers that support strong access controls and MFA. Now, if MFA is not supported on legacy system hosted by organizations internally, compensating controls can be introduced to temporarily harden access controls. So, for example, you may require physical console access, or you should require physical console access. You want to disable remote access if possible. You want to limit remote access to management network only. And so these are ways that you can control the access in the event that you do have to, if you have admins that need to access the system remotely, especially now where a lot of the work has transitioned to remote work. And then lastly, we have monitor certificate transparency logs. So you want to monitor certificate transparency, or what's referred to as CT, that log data for newly added certificates issued to organization-owned domains that have been authorized or requested by the organization, such as privileged user access permissions. All right, now let's see who was paying attention. What we're going to do now, we have a couple knowledge check questions for you. And once again, when you're filling out the knowledge checks, all you have to do is select the answer and we'll be able to capture that information. So I'm going to go ahead and just read the first one. Which of the following is the correct order of a DNS tampering sequence? I'll give everyone a few moments to answer this question. All right, looks like we have a good amount. What I'm going to do now is broadcast the results so you can see which other participants are selecting. All right, so the correct answer is option number 4, or D, depending on how you look at it: compromise, alter, redirect, decrypt. You can remember this using the acronym CARD, or CARD. First, the attacker compromises user credentials. Then they alter the DNS records by replacing legitimate addresses with fraudulent ones. Next, traffic is then rerouted to the attacker's infrastructure before passing it to the legitimate site. And then from there, attackers are then able to decrypt using valid certificates, which in turn will expose user data. All right. Thank you for taking part in that one. And I have one more poll for us. And once again, I'll give everyone a few moments to respond to this. After we got enough responses, I'll broadcast the results and I'll provide you with the answer. Interesting. I'll go ahead and broadcast the results. And in regards to this question, which choice best describes a CISA recommended action to mitigate DNS tampering? And it looks like the majority of the class selected option all of the above, or the fifth option, and that is correct. All of the above is the correct answer. CISA recommends reviewing DNS records, changing passwords regularly, adding MFA where possible, and then monitoring your cert logs. All right, so thank you for taking part in those 2 knowledge check questions. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Kobe.
Thank you for the great questions. Thanks, Adrian. Great questions there. Good response too. Thanks, everyone. All right, next we're going to discuss how to prevent DNS spoofing. So what is DNS spoofing? It's exactly what we've been talking about. The website privacy.net provides some really good recommendations for protecting against DNS spoofing. So everybody who agrees with this statement, raise your hand. A spoof site will look like the site you intend to go to. Yes, and that's exactly, got a lot of hands there, so thank you for the response. And that's exactly the purpose of a spoof site, is to trick people into thinking that they're going to the site they intended to go to. So generally speaking, but not always, a spoof site will look like your intended destination. So you need to check the SSL certificate by looking for HTTPS in the URL address, or a closed padlock in the URL bar of the browser. So depending on which browser you're using, that could be different. Next, maintain your antivirus software, and that's key to stopping malware from infiltrating your networks. And also, like I responded to a question previously in the chat, a lot of these security suites do have services that can tell you if a site has a good reputation or not, or a bad reputation, or that you should use a lot of care in visiting that site. And also, if possible, if ever possible, you need to disable JavaScript and WebRTC. JavaScript is a very common programming language that's used to deploy malware. It's used for a lot of things, so that's why hackers decided to deploy malware with it, because everybody's using it. And not all users can easily disable JavaScript due to its ubiquity. Like I said, it's needed for a lot of things, but it can help your machine if you do disable it. And WebRTC is a protocol used for both voice over IP and video chatting over IP, like Skype for Chrome. It's usually enabled by default and included on Firefox and Chrome browsers, and that should be disabled if not necessary. And finally, you need to choose an encrypted DNS service that validates DNSSEC. Some vendors offer DNS encryption services to prevent tampering. Domain name system security extensions provide authentication that ensures trust between the end user and the DNS server. This means that the end user knows responses are coming from legitimate domains and not from a tampered DNS log. So DNS attack recovery, what to do if you become a victim of this. If you do experience this, you'll want to implement some of these recommendations to secure your network. It's not an all-inclusive list, since this is an hour webinar, but they're meant to give you a starting point for remediating the incident. And we're covering the really most important topics here. If you do have a security vendor, ensure that your SLA, your service level agreement, does cover all of the activities required for the organization's needs, including reviewing DNS records for all the domains in the organization, reviewing all public domain records with domain registrars to verify the associated name server records are delegated to intended DNS servers. Review all DNS records on all authoritative and secondary DNS servers to verify that they resolve to their intended destination. And that's a very intensive process depending on how big your organization is and how many records you have and how many hosts you have. So a lot of organizations do opt to go with a vendor who can take on that kind of capacity. And any discovered discrepancies should be investigated immediately and treated as an incident, a security incident, or at least a potential security incident, and at the least a security event. Finally, reestablish your border gateway protocol connections as necessary and restart firewalls and other applicable apps, and then begin the recovery process. So that goes into a lot of different network related network related activities that are far beyond the scope of this webinar. So after we respond to DNS attacks, what's further recovery? Long-term preparation. So not just the immediate, but how to prevent this from happening in the future. The best way to do this is to be prepared with a good plan if that incident does occur. Create a DNS response plan, an incident response plan, and review and drill the steps at least annually because things do change constantly. Keep your systems and software patched and up to date, and analyze security investments to proactively upgrade your network defenses, as well as ensure your security solutions do not become obsolete, which can happen overnight. Your the recovery plan should also include adjustments for downtime, how much it's going to cost the organization for your network and service downtime, and how to prioritize systems and business functions to guide recovery efforts. So you want to get your important things online first. So those priorities need to be known and documented ahead of time in that recovery plan. So CISA also does provide DNS security services, including providing technical assistance to agencies that report anomalous DNS records, reviewing submissions from agencies that cannot implement multi-factor authentication on DNS accounts, providing regular delivery of newly added certificates to CT logs for agency domains. And they do this via the cyber hygiene service. And then finally, providing guidance to agencies through emergency directives, as well as through agency requested engagements. So now we're going to do another little knowledge check here and see what you come up with. Oh, sorry, wrong one. All right, the first question is, risks can persist beyond the period of traffic redirection. All right, getting a lot of response here. Great. It's slowing down now, so I'm going to go ahead and broadcast the results. Almost everybody answered true, and that is the correct answer. Risks can persist beyond the period of traffic redirection, and that's due to the ability of the perpetrators to alter DNS records and redirect traffic to their specific sites. Also, rogue sites could contain malware or cause devices to not respond to antivirus or software updates, causing further risk to the system. Thanks for the good response, everyone. We'll go to the next question that I have for you. An after-action report should include examination of which of the following: target selection, how the attack was carried out, third-party vendor performance, duration network was affected, or all of the above. Great responses once again. Slowing down now, so I'm going to go ahead and broadcast the results again. All of the above. Certainly you don't want to identify why a particular target was selected and then determine how the attack was carried out. How did your third-party vendors perform? And you'll want to know the duration of your outage. Some of this information might be transferable to your incident response or continuity of operation plans. Thanks for answering that, everyone. So here are a couple of case studies that really identify the importance of what we're covering here today. These are real-life scenarios that have happened from organizations that got caught up in DNS tampering attacks, in turn exposing them to massive losses, both by reputation and financial, and elevating their risk level. Each scenario does represent a publicly documented DNS attack. Also, these are excellent, very textbook case studies involving DNS tampering. So there was one called Operation Ghost Click, which was really a large-scale, long-running fraud scheme and that used DNS tampering, and it gathered advertising revenue by successfully infecting and then rerouting the DNS logs of millions of machines over several years. So this was a long-running scheme that really did a lot of damage. And if any of you follow cybersecurity news, then you're most likely familiar with this. Many of the details in this case come from the U.S. Attorney's Office press release regarding the case, as well as a follow-on article from the cybersecurity publication Krebs on Security, which is very well known. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Adrian and to further explain what happened here.
Thanks, Kobe. All right, so what happened with this case? Well, the perpetrators were charged with engaging in a massive and sophisticated internet fraud scheme that used malware to infect more than 4 million computers located in over 100 countries. Of the computers infected, at least 500,000 were in the United States, including computers belonging to government agencies like NASA, educational institutions, nonprofit organizations, commercial businesses, and individuals. The malware secretly altered the settings on infected computers and hijacked internet searches to reroute computers to websites and advertisements that earned revenue for the hackers. The more traffic that clicked the advertisers' websites and display ads, the more money the defendants earned. Therefore, they fraudulently increased website traffic that would earn them money. They accomplished this by making it appear that the internet traffic came from legitimate clicks and ad displays when in actuality it had not. To carry out the scheme, the defendants used what are known as rogue DNS servers and malware that was designed to alter the DNS server settings on infected computers. Victims' computers became infected when they visited certain websites or downloaded certain software. The malware altered the DNS server settings to route the infected computers to rogue DNS servers. The malware also prevented the installation of antivirus software and operating system updates, leaving those computers exposed to attacks by various other viruses. Now, when the user of an infected computer clicked on a link displayed through a search engine query, the malware caused the computer to be rerouted to a fraudulent site. So, for example, when the user of an infected computer clicked on the domain name link for the official website of Apple, the user was instead taken to a website for a business that purported to sell Apple software but was unaffiliated with the real Apple. When they clicked on the domain name link for the Internal Revenue Service, the user was instead taken to the website for H&R Block, a major tax preparation business.
Thank you very much, Adrian. That was good information there. Look at these impacts here on this next slide. Immense impact. And, the victims are on both sides. So this scam did not directly target the victims systems or operations. I mean, the organizations that were kind of targeted, so it didn't directly impact them or target them. So it really attacked on the user side with DNS changer Trojans, which are very dangerous. These Trojans take full control over network traffic, leading the user or the victim to any site that criminals choose. So even if a user types in a correct URL, they're still routed to a fake site, and any of that information that goes over that connection might be exposed. So some of these Trojans can use brute force attacks to alter routers' DNS settings. They can infect any settings connected to the compromised router. So if you compromise those routers, like Adrian mentioned earlier in the course, which was very common back in the day, just a few years ago, where all routers of a certain type had the same default admin password, and a lot of people chose not to change those. So that was a very common way to exploit those, and a lot of people don't update their routers and their network software. So by doing that, some versions of this malware, they're able to set up rogue dynamic host configuration protocol servers on networks, which is DHCP if you've heard of it, which were then able to infiltrate other connected networks. Additionally, DNS changer Trojans usually block access to system patches from security vendors, leaving your infected network vulnerable to additional attacks and just being completely under control. Systems that are already infected also become an easier target for more extensive cyber attacks later. Finally, these Trojans are persistent. Many contain rootkits. If you know what a rootkit is, it's something that hides itself very well, that unless you're pretty good with cybersecurity forensics, you're not going to ever know it's there. And they make the detection and removal from these systems almost very difficult. And sometimes people just choose to wipe their systems and start from scratch. They're so pervasive and so persistent. DNS changer Trojans can continuously modify an infected system's DNS settings to keep reporting or routing to fraudulent and malicious servers. So how was this ghost click attack identified? Analysts obtained copies of 2 servers involved in the attack. On the hard drives of these servers, they found public keys of several employees. These keys are what allowed the attackers to access command and control servers even without a password. Those keys were enough.
Now, how was this mitigated? And so, per the press release from the U.S. Attorney's Office, in conjunction with the arrest, authorities in the United States seized computers at various locations, froze the defendants' financial accounts, and disabled their network of U.S.-based computers, including dozens of rogue DNS servers located in New York and Chicago. Additionally, authorities in the United States took steps with their foreign counterparts to freeze assets located in other countries. Remediation efforts were immediately undertaken to minimize any disruption of internet service to the users of the computers infected with the malware. This remediation was necessary because the dismantling of the defendant's rogue DNS servers, to which millions of computers worldwide had been redirected, would potentially have caused all those computers to lose access to websites. Now, from a victim standpoint, law enforcement officials and cybersecurity experts realized that the infected DNS servers needed to be replaced with legitimate ones to avoid shutting off internet access for approximately 4 million infected machines. A third-party organization was appointed by the court to administer the replacement of DNS servers, and these servers provided continuity of service and allowed time for users to remove the malware and restore normal DNS settings.
Sorry, everyone. I was answering a chat. Got a little delayed there. All right. How did the victims recover? No, I'm sorry. Okay, now we're going to the Brazilian bank case, which was another huge case that had a major impact on this bank. Um, this is a case study against Brazilian bank, and instead of picking or targeting individual online banking customers one by one, these ambitious hackers took control of a Brazilian bank's entire DNS infrastructure to redirect customers to a perfectly reconstructed mirror or facsimile of their own website. When the users entered their account information, the hackers used that data that they entered to break into their real bank accounts and steal as much money as they wanted from those accounts. The attack lasted about 5 hours, which is a really long time, during which the attackers captured the transactions of thousands of the bank's customers worldwide. So the exploits used here, uh, the DNS tampering that they used allowed the hijacking to be performed without any action from the end user. This attack was so insidious in the sense that the user was completely unaware of the change that was made, and the hijacking worked without crafting or changing URLs in the user's browser. A user can use any browser and their regular shortcuts and still be susceptible to this type of attack. Even entering a URL in manually or from mobile devices, and it will still be sent to the malicious website instead of to the requested website. And this hijacking works at a gateway level, so it's not working at an individual system level. So I'm going to hand it over to Adrian about the details of how this was done.
All right, and so as per a summary contained in a 2017 Wired article, hackers changed the domain name system, or DNS, registrations of all 36 of the bank's online properties, commandeering the bank's desktop and mobile website domains to take users to phishing sites. In practice, that meant the hackers could steal login credentials at sites hosted at the bank's legitimate web addresses. Now, researchers believe the hackers may have have been even simultaneously redirected all transactions at ATMs or point of sale systems to their own servers, collecting the credit card details of anyone who used their card. And the number of affected customers hasn't been confirmed. Along with that, the article continued to describe that anyone visiting the bank's website URLs were redirected to lookalike sites. And those sites even had valid HTTPS certificates issued to the name of the bank, so the visitors' browsers would show a green lock and the bank's name, just as they would the real sites. Investigators found that the certificates had been issued 6 months earlier by Let's Encrypt, the nonprofit certificate authority that's made obtaining an HTTPS certificate easier in the hopes of increasing HTTPS adoption.
Yes, and after around 5 hours, the bank finally regained control of its domains. 5 hours doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're a bank as big as they are, it was very devastating. So they regained control of its domains, but they had to call up nic.br, which is the registrar for Brazil, the official registrar for Brazil. And they had to convince it to correct the DNS registrations, which I can't imagine what kind of bureaucracy they had to go through to do that. So the malware had 8 separate modules, and it covered abilities like credential stealing for Microsoft Exchange, Thunderbird, which was an email client, probably still is, I don't know, and local address books, updating systems, and a program called Avenger. This software is a legitimate rootkit removal tool, and it had been modified to shut down legitimate security software on any computer that downloaded it. The modules that were discovered were reportedly communicating with a CNC server, a command and control server in Canada. So next, we're going to look at some of the key takeaways from this webinar. Um, Remember that DNS has been continually evolving over the years, necessarily for security purposes and for redundancy purposes. So here are some things to remember. How to identify. Websites begin loading much slower than usual. Browser shows incorrect website information, and sometimes you'll get irrelevant and unwelcome pop-up ads. For the mitigation, we'll review here. Reviewing DNS records, at least on an annual basis, changing DNS account passwords, adding multi-factor authentication to DNS accounts, monitoring certificate transparency logs. And for recovery, verify your SLAs with your security vendors, review your DNS records again and public domain records, identify weak spots and the exploits that were used to prevent it from happening again, work with vendors or network admins to reestablish border gateway protocol connections, check and restart firewalls and other apps, get unblocked by your ISP, and begin application recovery. Over to you, Adrian.
Thank you, Kobe. Well, everyone, this concludes the incident response webinar, Preventing DNS Infrastructure Tampering. We hope you enjoyed this webinar and have come away with some knowledge to help you better protect yourself and your organization from DNS threats. I definitely appreciate all the feedback and the comments in the student chat. Hopefully we were able to, if not us, another student was able to assist you with any issues that you were concerned with. Now, in regards to this, if you would like to learn more, we encourage you to visit the CISA resources listed on the slide. Along with that, be sure to download the slides from the Files Pod in the lower left of your screen and take them with you. All links within the slide deck are active, so once you've downloaded them, you'll be able to open it. And so I know we didn't talk a lot about this, but there is a web links that provides you some links to some of the highlighted information that you see on the resources slide. So that's why we're letting you take those home with you. Hopefully they'll be helpful for you as you go away back to your organizations. And this is just an additional reading if you're interested in regards to DNS, in regards to the bank's hijacking. So that's another article that's available to you. So take a look at that. Once again, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you in other offerings of this course and other courses in our incident response series. Have a good day.